Thank you for joining me on All Things Missing and Lost. On this channel, we will delve into things that have gone missing and are lost. Some of them people, some of them places, some of them objects and vehicles. Some of them would have been found by now, but some of them remain lost forever. And in this episode, we will be speaking about a missing plane. In recent news, we have heard of the missing Malaysian Airlines MH370, which has been presumed to have crashed, but no one has ever found its remains. By remains, I'm speaking of the majority of its fuselage, the dead bodies that come from a missing plane. But in this episode, I will not be speaking about MH370. Instead, I'll be speaking about another airline that operates in a neighboring country. Adam Air is a regional airline of Indonesia. On 11th of February, Adam Air 782 had gone missing. It was supposed to take a 2-hour journey from Jakarta to Makassar airport in Indonesia, and that short journey was just a routine flight. No one expected for things to go as wrong as they did. On this flight, there were 2 experienced pilots, a captain with 7,000 hours of flight time under his belt, and a first officer of almost 3,000 hours under his belt. So both were experienced pilots. They had a flight crew of about 7, of which 4 of them were trainees, and they carried 145 passengers on this plane. It was a Boeing 737-300. In fact, things began to go wrong when they did the pre-flight inspection, and the pilots found that number 2 IRU unit had failed. IRU stands for Inertial Reference Unit. And they found that it was not working and alerted the technical crew, who then replaced it with a serviceable unit. The technical crew then tested and aligned both IRU units, because there were both 2 units on board, one on the left and one on the right. It seemed that both IRU units were working and they were necessary for navigational purposes. And so the plane was deemed fit to fly, and at 6 a.m. it took off on the 11th of February to head from Jakarta to Makassar, Indonesia. This short trip began for 20 minutes and everything seemed to go smoothly. But it was after 20 minutes when the plane started to diverge right from its planned route. In fact, the flight management computer, the FMC, switched to the IRU-2 without anyone noticing. The IRU-2 is the replaced serviceable unit. Remember, they had found the previous unit not working. They replaced it with a serviceable one, and now it is again not working. It was not noticed because the cockpit instruments showed the plane still tracking towards Makassar. So the plane, while making small deviations to the right, was traveling at tremendous speeds as a Boeing 737-300. And at these tremendous speeds, as the minutes tick by, it grows increasingly, of course. On that day, the flight controllers on the floor would have usually noticed this, because there is a route adherence monitoring system, RAM system, that warns the flight controller when the planes go off course by up to 10 miles. But on this strange day, it was set to a limit of 20 miles. In addition, the flight controllers on duty had not received the required training to spot what needs to be done when they start noticing a plane going off course. So nothing was done. Things went about as per normal on flight with no one noticing, until a flight attendant noticed the sun emerging on the left instead of the right of the plane. Because if they were truly heading east, the plane would show the sun shining on them, not from the left, but from the right. This strangeness alerted the pilots, who also then began to spot strange things they shouldn't see on their journey towards Makassar. They spotted mountains emerging in places whereby the maps had not shown them. and the worry began to creep into their hearts that they were slowly going off course. In fact, as they started to look around and check maps to try to figure out where they were, cross-referencing it with the faulty system on board, which they did not suspect was faulty, it took 4 hours before the pilots finally realized they were in deep trouble, because now the pilots could no longer radio the control towers that they were supposed to see. In fact, the autopilot disengaged because it had gone out of range from its preset course. In addition, the navigational equipment, the IRU, was also now gone off because it had gone out of range. The pilots had no choice but to take over and fly the plane manually. Something was severely wrong. The pilots then began to try to ascertain where they were by radioing nearby planes, hoping that they would spot them on the radar and then be able to advise them as to their exact location. There was a glimmer of hope when a nearby plane radioed them and claimed to have seen them flying directly under it and was trying to give the pilots directions. But this glimmer of hope soon turned dim when the pilots realized that there was a mistake. The guiding plane was speaking about a different plane. It had not spotted them. In fact, this guiding plane could be hundreds of kilometers away. In the cabin area, the passengers soon began to panic because what was supposed to be a 2-hour flight was now taking way too long, 4 hours, and they had not yet landed. Murmurs that something must have gone severely wrong were spreading panic throughout the entire cabin. In fact, it was with this rising panic whereby the pilots were starting to make plans to ditch the plane into the sea, because once the plane runs out of fuel, there's no other choice but to land in the sea. But it would have then 0 chances of survival, almost 0. The pilots were trying to avoid this outcome when they now spotted a thin strip of land as well as what looked like a thin strip of runway for an airport. They did not know where this was. They did not know whether it was a suitable airport, because an airplane like the Boeing 737 requires 2,200 meters of runway strip for it to be able to land safely. They did not know the length of that runway strip. There was no way they could radio the control towers because they did not know the frequency of these particular towers. And yet at the same time, they could not alert the towers, and so they could not ensure no planes were taking off or coming in at about the same time they would be trying to land. It was a highly risky operation. The pilots did not realize that the airport that they had spotted was actually Tambolaka Airport that was on the island of Sumba. It was not built to receive 737s, but instead it was built as a runway that would only take smaller planes. As such, that runway that they saw was not 2,200 meters as required for a Boeing 737, but it was only 1,800 meters. Still, the pilot took over. The experienced captains started to maneuver the plane towards a descent with no other choice. He managed to land the plane safely, brake just before they ran out of runway, and safely disembarked the passengers who were so relieved. Then he radioed Adam Air headquarters in Jakarta, and they flew a crew over to repair the plane and then fly the plane back to Jakarta airport without the passengers. Sad to say, the pilot was subsequently fired for this mishap, but I wouldn't say on hindsight that was such bad news. Because a year later, Adam Air 574 vanished under similar circumstances, having lost its navigational abilities and then crashed, killing all that were on board. In fact, when the National Transport Safety Committee of Indonesia took over the flight and checked it to find out if there were any issues that might have caused this technical lapse, they discovered many issues with the technical records, maintenance records, as well as also corruption behind the scenes at Adam Air. Eventually, 1 year later, after Adam Air Flight 574 crashed, Adam Air shut down and declared bankruptcy. I don't know about you, but looking on hindsight, it's a good thing that pilot got fired and hopefully he's moved on to greener skies. But let me know what you think, and remember to like, share and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you at my next recording on episode 2 of All Things Missing and Lost.